Hi, I'm Amy. Thank you for tuning in. Today I'm joined by the lovely David Fenne because the Y Book Club are reading Overemotional this month, and those who've already read it are reading Overthinking. So I thought it'd be nice, since we've done an event together, I was like, David, can you come and answer some of my questions? And I'm really sad for the audience that they couldn't see you dancing during that little I don't think I've had somebody quite so enthusiastically dance before, so I'm sorry.
I was excited. I'm sorry.
Are you a Buffy fan? I feel like this could be a whole separate interview.
Yeah, I was a late Buffy fan. My husband was like, "Do you like Buffy, right?" And I was like, "I've never seen it." And he's like, "This is exactly your humor. It's like it's so good." So we had a binge of it, starting in the pandemic, and then like it's a long show. But yeah, big Buffy fan now.
Oh, that's amazing. You can stay then. I should have pointed the camera the other way around. I'm sure you've probably seen my Buffy shrine on my social media. It's like this wall. It's quite, I'll show you afterwards. I'll turn the camera around. Yeah, we had the same conversation. My husband showed me like all the Christian Slater films, and in exchange, I showed him Buffy. So I feel like it was a worthwhile exchange. But we're not here to talk about Buffy. We're here to talk about your books. So would you like to introduce your trilogy? It's a trilogy, isn't it?
Yes, currently it's a duology because the third one's not out, but it will be a trilogy once the last one comes out. So I have props here. This is the first one. So my book is Overemotional, the first one in the Overemotional trilogy. It is a queer YA urban fantasy about a guy called Stephen who has emotion-based powers. So whenever he feels strong emotions, the opposite kind of manifests. So when he's feeling really sad, good things happen. And when he's feeling really happy, terrible ruin is wrought. And he kisses another boy for the first time and makes that guy's head explode, which we can all agree is relatable content. So he runs away to the most miserable town in the UK called Grunsby-on-Sea. Shenanigans ensue. He is pursued by his best friend Freya, her boyfriend Marcus, and her American friend Troy. And there's also a mysterious secret agency called Dima who are also lurking in the shadows. It's full of jokes, full of superpowers. There's abandoned labs, bit of everything, set at the Great British Seaside in the winter, because that is the worst place in the world. I can say that I'm from the seaside. But yeah, it's super fun, super British, super gay. And the second one just came out, Overthinking, and that is the gang going off to university and more shenanigans ensuing. And that's currently where we're at. And then the third one is out in November, and it's called So Over This. And I can't show you the cover yet, but it looks really good.
Oh, you've seen it. That's always exciting, isn't it? Good moment. Yeah, I think when I first picked this book up, because your publisher reached out and asked me if I wanted to read the second book, and I was like, oh, I've not got around to reading the first book yet. So they sent me the first book, and I binge read it in like a couple of days. And what really struck me is it's so different. It just feels like a breath of fresh air. I do love YA, but you start to kind of predict where things are going sometimes. Like you read a thriller, and it might be similar to another one, but it's just like nothing. And I loved that. Like, I love the fact that it just feels different and unique and exciting. And I think shenanigans is the right word. There's plenty of shenanigans, and I love that. I love a book that's busy and exciting. And I think my favorite character is Troy. I have to say I'm team Troy. And a character whose name has completely gone out of my head. What's Freya's boyfriend called?
Marcus.
I love Marcus as well.
He is the main character. People either are like, I am team Marcus. Marcus is very much the kind of the comedic foil. So he is the straight man in the comedy. So people either really love that he's like, what is going on here? Or people are like, I hate him, dump him, get someone else in. So I like that. He's Marmite.
He's totally relatable. Like, he is me if I walked into this world. Like, what's happening? Why are people's heads exploding? Like, this is really weird. And then Troy just is a darling. So do you have a favorite character is my first question. And, you know, I feel like it's like choosing between
my children.
The things you've created. And how do you go about creating characters? Because they do just feel like my friends at this point. Like, they feel like real people.
Oh, thank you. Character point of view is like paramount to me. And so I'm always trying to like make sure I know exactly how a character is going to react in any given scenario. So I really like try to make sure that every character is having a very different perspective. My favorite is probably Troy too. he is hang on, he's that one. Reverse camera. There we go. He is a golden retriever in an American sort of like all American kind of squeaky clean outer casing. But he's such a fish out of water and such a fun character to write, and all of the kind of saying gosh, and I don't know, he's just such a perfect little best boy. He's really fun to write, and his uncomfortability,
discomfort, one of those things.
One of these people in this thing is a writer. The other one is pretending. But his discomfort at being around all the Britishisms, it's very much kind of an inversion of me because I studied in America for a while. So he's a really fun character to play around with. Obviously, I have to say, I obviously love my main character, Stephen. He is very much me, but a bit more neurotic, if that's even possible. And I also I always love contrast. The reason why Marcus kind of exists is because I was like, we're going to have this like American do-good, really positive thing, force in the book. I want to contrast that with like Grumpy Cat, with like someone who just really doesn't want to be there. And that kind of clash is fun. Some of the agents in the DEMA sort of conspiracy stuff that's happening in the background, there's a very strong, stern head field director contrasted with her junior agent, who is this lovely Geordie lass who keeps messing up. And she's Agent Wren. She's also one of my favorites because it's just really fun to play on that contrast a lot. So, but I love all of my children equally. What can I say?
Agent Wren is really funny. She's like, oh, you know that thing you told me not to do? Like, I was meant to just watch. I just dived in. Is that okay? And they're like, oh my God, stop it.
She's so keen. And I think that's a really fun point of view to play, is that I will do anything. I'm super keen. Yeah.
I think humor for me, I don't know, I find it really hard to laugh at a book. I don't know what it is, but a book has to like really tap into my specific brand of humor. And I don't even know what that brand is at this point. But I did find it really funny. And I don't know whether that is because your background is in improv, or whether you're just naturally funny. I don't know. I'll just take all the compliments, then you can go out like feeling really good about yourself the rest of the day.
And then start writing and feel terrible about myself. Yeah.
Publishing is good at bringing us back down. But yeah, so the question is, do you think that your improv background helped with that? And do you think your writing that you're now doing helps your improv? Like, how do those two things interrelate?
Yeah, it's interesting. I get asked quite a lot by publishing people about improv, because to them, improvising for an hour on stage sounds like the worst thing that they could possibly do.
Yes.
Yes.
We like in publishing, we like revising things over and over again until they're perfect. So the thought of it's like you asking for the first draft of my book and printing it. That's how I feel about it. I know.
That terrifies me because I'm finishing book 3 right now, and I'm like, oh no, I need to revise this. But it is a different thing. And I think what's really good about improv is it does get you out of your head a little bit, and you can kind of just yes and everything, and things don't have to be perfect. They won't be perfect, and that's kind of good. But both kind of have aspects of storytelling that are kind of useful, kind of transferable. With improv, so I do long form. My company, Pinch Punch, we do an improvised murder mystery, an improvised Agatha Christie, and we get audience suggestions. We get audience stories, at the start, and then we make a character based on that, who will then get on a train and maybe get murdered. And you have to sustain that character for an hour. And if you don't do it right to begin with, you're like, oh, just kill me, get this out of the way, please stop, please kill this. So we talk a lot about character point of view and character perspective, and like, you should be able to pick up a character, drop them into completely new circumstances, and know how they would react. And so we talk a lot about, do they have a point of view, or are they playing circumstances? And so with my writing, I really try hard to be like, what is my point of view? And it should be kind of like an I statement, like, I'm the kind of guy who, or I always, and it just gives you a lens to know where this character is going. So for example, Freya, she she's a bit of a nosy what's it. She is a junior detective herself. She loves solving mystery. So her point of view is like, I need to know things. So if I put her in a locked room with something, she's going to be tearing things apart, being like, what is this? And same is if her friend has a secret, say a big secret, say he's hiding in the closet about a few things, she's going to be relentless because I know that she's like, he's hiding something. So I use improv to really work on character point of view and really like hone that. And then on the other side of it as well, it's really good for plotting. If you both improv and write and books, you have to have that innate sense of a structure. I like the 3-act structure quite a lot. I know some people differ in how they view that, but both things you have to kind of have that in the back of your mind so that you know where the story is going. You know roughly what characters play what role in getting there. So I find that quite useful, and it's also really good for just if you're in a spot and you're like, I have no idea how to get myself out of this, you just yes and everything until you get out and you go so it was great for world building, for building the world of Overemotional, like where do these powers come from, who else has them, why are they there, all of these questions. I just kind of like improvised until I found one that fitted the best and then went with that. So I don't know if my writing necessarily affects my improv the other way around per se, because that might be a bit too much. But yeah, I think it's a great skill, and I really recommend it for authors, for writers, just to take an improv class once in your life, just to free your mind just that little bit, because I feel like we're sometimes this close to the page and you just need that little bit of perspective, and that can hopefully bring it to you. But I'm not going to force anyone to do improv if they don't want to.
I want to try it, but not in front of people. I think doing it in front of people is the key. Like that, I want to watch you do it in front of people. I don't want to do it myself.
Come along.
You know what? I did Edinburgh Festival. I say did. I went and passively sat in the audience several times at Edinburgh Festival. I've not ever done anything there. And I love it, but I think taking a 1, 2, or 3-year-old would have been horrendous. I'm now wondering if a 4-year-old might be the right age to try it, because there's loads of good stuff for kids, isn't there? Like they do pantomimes and stuff like that. And I'm wondering if lots of us go, we could be like, okay, I'm going to go see an improv show. You can go watch a pantomime with your grandma.
Yeah, pawn the kids off. Yeah, they need to have a service really of doing that, don't they? Finding a place to chuck
you with your Pokemon puppet that you did show me earlier. David's in between improv gig is to babysit the kids who are.
Maybe not.
Just be like, what's that? You need me? Like, I'm just gonna go now.
I was up at Edinburgh Festival last year. I was doing Edinburgh Fringe, and then I did the Edinburgh Book Festival at the same time. And like I had one day off to kind of do the book stuff and then come back to it. I was exhausted. I was like bleeding from my eyes. I wasn't really, but I was so tired. And I was doing my event like, so I was like so glad for a microphone after, days of shouting in front of audiences. So tired.
Yeah, again, something that I can't relate to the idea of relentlessly, because I know sometimes when you're writing you have to find the energy from somewhere, like you're on a deadline, you need to get the work done, but it's a different kind of slog than doing it with an audience in front of you.
Yeah, it's I lost so much weight at the Edinburgh Fringe last year just from like poor diet and just prancing around every day, and also doing a lot of walking. Edinburgh's really hilly.
I imagine it burns a lot of calories as well. I should probably prance a bit more in my daily life. But...
take a little writing break to prance.
Okay, I'll do that. So I wanted to talk to you about comedy a bit, because I feel like when I'm writing, my characters, I've probably just stolen it from Buffy, to be honest, but the type of humour that I put in is like the kind of pithy, taking the mickey of each other type thing. And that flows quite naturally, because I think that's how I think. They say the stuff that I'm thinking and wouldn't dare to say quite a lot of the time. Does the comedy come quite naturally when you're writing, or is it something that you kind of have to layer in there actively as an editing thing?
Usually it comes quite naturally. I think I'm the same as you in that it that sort of bathotic humor is quite British, and I feel like we innately have that sense of taking the piss out of something. I find sometimes it's balancing that is my thing. I might go too hard, and then on a reread I'll go, oh, actually this is more of a serious moment, maybe we'll just dial that down a little bit. And on
so you have to take the humor out rather than add more of it.
Usually that, yeah. Or I will have written a joke and I'll go back to it and I'm like, that is terrible. And I'm trying to like, that's when not being improvised is a good thing, because I can then condense it and be like, what is the actual joke? And then how can I take words out until it gets as funny as it could be? Because usually people have good jokes and they just drastically overwrite it. So that's my kind of comedic I genuinely forget though that it's comedic, and I sent the manuscript for book 2 to my editor, and then she was like, I was laughing out loud in my when I was reading it. I was like, really? I was like, oh god, because I only remember the like, you know, the scary bits or the traumatic bits, and I'm like, it's not funny. And she's like, yeah, it is, you put in loads of jokes. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot that. The pressure is though on. I'm writing book 3 now, and the pressure, I am like, oh, I haven't done a joke in a while. So I do consciously think about that sometimes, but for the most part, it's just how would people react to the circumstances like human beings would. And I think British sensibility is pretty good at taking the mickey out of something. So that's where it comes from.
That's brilliant, because I think from what I've heard from other people, I think if humor isn't natural to them, they tend to write the story and then layer the humor in, and maybe that's why it feels so organic, that you just are naturally, like, you're funny to talk to, so it obviously kind of comes through. You are. I don't always sit and laugh all the way through these interviews. I mean, some others are really funny, but it's not necessarily our quality that we're known for. We tend to be known to be more introverted and quiet. So you mentioned about a 3-act structure in terms of plotting. Do you plot to that, or is that just something as you're writing? Do you plot in advance to that structure?
Yes. Yeah, I think so. My plotting strategy actually comes down to a lot of these. I like to write down plot points on sticky notes so I can rearrange them, because I hate writing a plan and then I had to change the plan. But and I like the physical thing of writing. So I write everything out on sticky notes, and then I have bits of paper with like Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, and so I find it's really useful when you're like, I know the plot, and then you look at it and go, oh, there's a big like gap in Act 2. Usually it's Act 2. It's a big gap in Act 2. So I find it's useful to kind of get some perspective and look at the whole thing laid out. I do change as I go, but for the most part, things do kind of, and I do kind of revolve these books around 3 kind of acts, so that I know roughly where the story's going, where the character arcs need to go. Book 3, I know currently I will be finishing it soon. I know has a very large first act, which is a problem, but because I'm able to look at it through that lens, I know where to kind of focus my editing efforts. But you know, no, I can't write by the seat of my pants, like, at all. I need to know exactly where I'm going. Even like just planning out a scene before I write it, even if it's just like a line, is useful to me. But no, I like to have things at least semi planned out, because then it gives me some chance to improvise and add jokes naturally when they come up, rather than
So you're thinking about the smaller stuff rather than the big picture stuff as you go along. I used to be more chaotic. With the first Mina book, I plotted probably the first quarter, got super excited, was like, I really want to write this, so I just started writing. And it worked to some extent, but it was a real process of discovery, and Mina took herself in some really like wrong situations. And I'm just like, oh God, I've let you just run wild and I've got to rein you in now. So I think the further I go on, like the more regimented about plotting I'm becoming. I used to think, oh, plotting will get rid of the creativity, but actually it helps you, it frees you. I think sometimes if you've got some idea where you're going, you can be creative within that framework.
Yeah, I think definitely. I think Overemotional is the neatest of the books in terms of narrative, because it is so self-contained and like very much like 3-act structure. Overthinking is my I'm going to say that this is not meant derogatory. It is my messy child, but in a good way, because they're at university. It is intentional, but because of the kind of like looser time frame that the plot takes place, it's slightly fuzzier in terms of where certain acts kind of fall. But I found whenever I was like having existential crises, anytime I would like return back to the structure and be like, right, okay, what does need to happen, where do I need to go, and it just helps to kind of like put you back on the right track, I think.
So did you know when you started that it was going to be a trilogy, and did you plot it as such?
No. No, I did not. I wrote the first one as a standalone initially, and I was like, it will sell easier if it's a standalone, and then I got right to the end, and I was like, oh, I left myself a little door open, and then I started to get quite excited by the idea of a trilogy, or at least having a second one or whatever. And so I began to kind of formulate a rough idea of where it could go. And then we sold it as a trilogy to my publisher. We actually, when it was going out into submission to different publishers, it kind of was like, well, it could be either. And we actually had a few offers for it as a standalone. But Ink Road bought it as a trilogy. Yay. So then I had to go, oh no, I actually have to figure out where this is going. Book 2 was I knew where Book 2 was headed. Like, I was like, I know the beginning and I know the end. And it was just the bit in the middle that was a bit like I had to, all the whys and wherefores had to work out. Book 3 was very much a strapline, and when I started to write it, I was like, oh, because if you finish Book 2, you know why it makes a swing. So I had a lot of the writing of Book 3 was, again, knowing roughly where it was headed, but getting all the big brushstrokes in between figured out. So yeah, trilogies are hard. And I think what you're saying about like the first Mina being a bit chaotic, or like, in that sort of like process, I think you're right. Like a first book can be a little bit, because you're kind of, yeah, let's see what works. But then as soon as you're in that series, you go, oh no, I have to not even think about it as a book in and of itself. It's part of an act now, part of an arc, sorry. So I think books 2 and 3 need to be a little bit more planned, just to make sure you reach that right bit. Oh yeah.
As well, there's that whole thing, isn't there, where you're writing a book and you think, okay, this is decent, this might get me an agent, is what I was thinking when I was writing Mina. So I was like, I'm going to take my time, make sure it's as good as it can be, and then the publisher buys the second book and goes, how fast can you write it? And you're like, oh, we're on the publishing treadmill now, I've heard about this. And it does literally become, you've got to know, like, I've got to write it. When I was writing Mina 2, it was 1,000 words a day, just because I knew that was all I had time for. I'd got 1 or 2 hours a day to write, so it's going to be 1,000 words a day for 90 days basically, and I just had to do it. Whereas book 1, you can take, I always say to people who are like rushing to try and get an agent, I'm like, make the most of this time. If you're rushing, it won't be as good as it can be, the book. And also, this is the last time that you will be able to kind of languish in your draft and really, really kind of figure it out, because your publisher will want it and you'll have to finish your first draft, have a quick read and send it, probably, if you're anything like me, and a little edit. I think that's the hard thing with a trilogy. Yours especially, I don't know how you did that 2 in 1 year, is like impressive.
There is smoke coming out of my fingers on a daily basis. Yeah, trilogies are hard. No one, I think there's this sort of glamorous view of it in the general public, where you're like, oh, it's a trilogy. That's of course how stories are told, in threes. And then you actually have to do it, and you're like, oh no, okay, this is tough. And yeah, not having the luxury to sit back and really like work out other things on, how many first books are like drafted. You don't get that on books 2 and 3. You have to get it done. So it does become a bit more, not utilitarian, but like you've just got to buck up your ideas and get writing.
At least you're more experienced by then, aren't you? And I think the nice thing with readers, what I've noticed about the reviews of book 2 and 3, every now and again I get tagged in stuff for book 1, and it would say stuff like, I hate vampires, I don't like horror, but I thought I'd give this a go. And you know what? I didn't like it. And I'd be like, oh, okay. And it wasn't just once. I got tagged in like this several times. Whereas I think the nice thing with the trilogy is that if people have stayed with you, then you know that they are with you by choice. Like, they pick up your first book and they don't know what they're going to get. So the second and third one, like, they've stayed with the course with you.
Then the weight of expectations. Because if they like the first one, if they don't like the second one, you're like, oh no, I've lost them.
I was more worried about that for the second book. I was really worried because there was that feeling of people were comparing it to Buffy and stuff, and I'm like, oh my god, so it's got the next book's for Mina and the Slayers. I really need to go hard in the Buffy direction, but not too hard. And I think the second one, I spent a lot of time second guessing what I thought readers wanted.
Yeah.
And by the third one, I came out the other side and I was like, actually, I need to do what I did for the first book, which is write the book that I want. And you can probably tell when you read the third book, it literally has some wild stuff in there just because I wanted to write about that thing. Like, originally Mina was going to go to Texas, and I was like, oh, Texas, it's a great place, but what's the hook for Texas? And then I went Roswell, and I was like, oh, aliens, got it.
Aliens. Cool.
So yeah, and she goes to alien museums and stuff just because that's what I did. I went to Roswell and had to go to the cheesy. Yeah. The same year, we went to the town where they filmed Vampire Diaries, swung by New Orleans to go and do the interview of the vampire bit, went to Roswell. It was just...
This is an incredible holiday.
Yeah.
Very jealous.
It was a wild time. 3 weeks driving across, mostly husband driving across America while I read and played computer games while he was driving. Yeah, this is the kind of stuff I want to do on holiday. Like, I want to go to these fun locations. So that's what Mina did. And I think the second book is so difficult because it is only the second time you've done it. By the third one, I was starting to, it was still really hard to write, but I felt a little bit more like I knew what I was doing. It was actually, I'd written previous stuff that didn't get published, but I feel like in the Mina world, it was my third proper go at it, and I knew a little bit more what I was doing. Anyway.
The thing I find really weird about book 3 in particular, and book 3s in particular, is book 1 you will have written, a year ago and it comes out. And while you're doing that, you're writing book 2. So you kind of have this kind of sheltered view of the world. But by the time you're on to book 3, book one should be out. So you will have already seen some of the feedback, positive or negative. So I found as I was writing book 3, a lot of it was kind of like, I was responding to a couple of things that I had seen, both in a good way and a bad way. Like, I feel like I was able to be like, oh, okay, I'll paper over this hole that someone's picked in the fabric of the world or whatever. But I did have to have a moment where I was like, oh, am I just responding to a bad review through the medium of another book? I shouldn't do that. So I did end up cutting that bit. But I do find it interesting that your then perspective of what you're writing begins to warp as other people have read it, and these characters are no longer your own. Weird. Absolutely. People don't really prepare you for this.
No, they don't. I remember Laini Taylor described it really well. I saw her doing an interview, and she said she thinks of each of her books no longer belonging to her. Once they're written, they're out and they're not hers anymore. They belong to readers. And I was like, okay, that's fine when you've finished a trilogy, but when you're still writing it, it does feel really hard. And I think what I found with feedback is, so generally I get tagged in reviews that are positive, and you read them, and there might be one thing that is negative in there. Like, people write a 4-star review and they'll say, if only it just had less of or more of. And they're always conflicting. So like, it'll say less romance, less blood, more blood. And, you're reading it and like thinking, I can't actually please all these people. Like, my friend Sharon would just be happy if it was all murder and no kissing at all. And some people are like, can you just leave the vampire stuff a bit and just have Mina and Jared kiss like all the time? Like, well, I don't want to do either of those things. I like blood and kissing equally, so they're going to get equal page space. But
an unhinged sentence, I love it.
Honestly, people ask me what my brand is at this point, and I'm like, murder and kissing and vampires. Generally, there are always vampires, though, to be fair. Sometimes there are houses that eat people. Nice. And werewolves and stuff. So there's always something weird and supernatural at play, but murder and kissing are the constants.
No, I feel like this is the curse of YA, is that it is held to such a high, like, there is no other genre or age group or whatever of books that are like ripped apart by its own fans so much. I will, especially queer stuff as well. I found I get quite a lot of like queer fans who are fans of the book but will be like, oh, but this, oh, but that. And I'm like, I'm a queer man writing this. Like, I do have some perspective on this. This isn't just like plucked from nowhere. So I do feel like YA is tough. YA is tough. The fans love it, but they also love to hate it.
I think part of that is that you've got teenagers reading it and you've got also adults reading it. And I think some adults read it and they judge it by the standard of an adult novel. And it's like, well, actually, like one of them was saying how Mina keeps making mistakes, and I was like, she's a teenager, and if she didn't make any, like there would be no book. Like if she didn't walk into that falling down house, she's not going to find the dead body in the falling down house, so she needs to go into it. So yeah, I think adult readers sometimes can be critical of YA for that reason, that they forget that actually this book is aimed at a 12+ audience.
When they're like, I can relate to it, and you're like, well, you're not a teenager, that's why.
Yeah, I know. I always find it funny when you read like middle grade reviews written by adults, and they're like, oh, the characters aren't relatable. I'm like, well, no, because they're 9. You know? Philip Pullman was asked that in one of his interviews. Like somebody was like, oh, you know, how do you feel about writing outside your own experience? And he was like, well, I do it as tactfully as I can. And he's added stuff. So like, I think somebody asked him about how deaf people communicate with their demon, who's an animal. So he added that in a book, like a reader kind of steered him. But he said, but at the end of the day, you know, I'm not a 9-year-old girl called Lyra. And that was the premise on which my books are based. So I think, and as well, like you writing about your own experience of being gay, like that isn't everybody's experience of being gay. And like my experience of being straight isn't everybody's experience of being straight. And I think that people do read it with their own lens, especially like you said. I think LGBTQIA+ is such a kind of like vocal and amazing and powerful community, but with the vocal can come, I don't know, it's like an expectation you feel you have to live up to.
Absolutely. And like queer people aren't a monolith. Like our experiences aren't the same. So I think it's important in everything. Like the reviews that get me are when someone criticizes something that's like come from my own perspective, and I'm like, oh, this is like semi-autobiographical, like this much. And like when they're like, oh, this wouldn't happen, I'm like, but it did. So but yeah, but they are such a wonderful wonderful community. And I like when you get tagged in stuff that people are like, oh, this really resonated with me, it does like fill your little heart a little bit, so that makes it all better.
It does. I remember the books that I read in the 90s. I know you're younger than with me, so don't tell me what year you were born, I'll cry. But you know, it's probably after that point even. But yeah, the books are in the 90s, like everybody was white and middle class in like point horror books predominantly that I read. Everybody was straight in the ones that I was reading, certainly. And I think the exciting thing with YA now is that readers will see themselves in that. But with that comes the downside of this is not my experience. You know, it now isn't this kind of really bland, not representative stuff, but it also will raise the questions. If you have some Black characters, some Black people will see that as their experience, and some people it won't be. And that is a big challenge. I'm getting better at that. I've used sensitivity reads, and I think that's my main hint, because especially one of my main characters, Della, I used a Black female sensitivity reader who was a similar age, just that I could kind of say, this is not my experience, can you check it because it's closer to yours? But still, hers isn't the same experience. So even a sensitivity reader can't 100% say this is representative of that experience. Absolutely. Did you use any sensitivity readers? Or because I suppose you're writing more, that is your experience, so you maybe don't need them in the same way. Was that even a question at this point? Like, am I making sense?
No, it's interesting. I did, especially with BookTube, there are aspects of that I was like, I think I want a sensitivity read for something. And again, if you know, you kind of know.
Yeah.
Ultimately, because of like publishing things, we weren't able to get that in time, but we did work. I worked really hard with my publisher and to make sure that certain things were as good as they can be. Obviously, you can never, you know, and like one thing that we did work on was about trigger warnings in books, which I find really interesting, because I was like, I don't want trigger warnings in the front, not for the reasons people might think though. Because I was like, if you say this book has this, and this, without context, that can make the book seem really dark and not what it is. So I talked to a publishing friend of mine who recommended instead to do an author's note that kind of puts these things in the context in which they are brought up. Because if I was like, this has like, I don't know, like coercive relationships, abuse of power, blah, 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 things like that, you might think this is quite a sinister book. And like, there are definitely dark aspects to it. But by putting them in the context, I think it means people who are sensitive to those things can get the right view of the book. And I obviously know it won't be for everyone, but that was the way we kind of like not sidestepped the issue, but we like dealt with the issue of sensitivity, especially. So I've done that for book 1 and book 2, and I will be doing it for book 3. And I think it's nice because then, if people do need that, they can read that, and if they don't need it, but then even then, like some like reviews are like, oh, he's done this stupid comment. I'm like, oh my god, I can't win. I'm like, if you don't want to read that bit, move on.
Yeah, it's a tricky one because I haven't done them, and nobody has ever said to mine, or I actually could have done with a heads up on that. I was kind of waiting for that, and I thought if I get that, then I will address it and do one for the next book, because the content of mine, I feel like, I mean, somebody can tell me I'm wrong, but on the back it's very clear what they're about.
It's horror, like, so there's that expectation that there will be horrific things. Like that's kind of
like I've read some horror books that say things at the front like contains gory scenes and body horror, and I'm like, well, yeah, maybe it's helpful for some readers that, but I think on the back of the book, and like some people have mentioned that like it has family dynamics that aren't great, and that is very clear from the blurb that that's what you're going to get from this book. So it is something I always listen to people's answers with interest, because it's something I've thought about and debated whether it's needed. And I talked to my publisher about it, and they kind of suggested for these books that they weren't needed, but it is something. I like the author note idea. I think Farida did that on her latest book, When Sleeping Girls Lie. I think I always want to say, that's When Sleeping Dogs Lie. I'm like, I'm going to not mangle this book title. She wrote a really nice author note in that did the same thing that you said. It explained in a kind of detailed, contextual way, as opposed to a list. Because I think the lists are useful if it's got some stuff in that you don't expect. Because I'm not a particularly sensitive reader, but every now and again something will go, oof, I didn't expect that. And I would have liked heads up, especially stuff to do with children. Like, I have a young child. If something happens to a young child, I'm like, oh, I could have done with a little warning with that, before it hit me. So I do get it as a reader. That's the only thing I would like to be warned about. So yeah, it is in my mind. And it's nice that you and your publisher put so much thought into it. That's really cool. I think I've asked you most of the things I wanted to ask you. So the last thing I'm going to ask, you probably get asked the superpowers question all the time, but what superpower would you like to have? And you don't have to have the attached consequence of emotions and stuff, like,
Oh, the question. Well, I mean, everyone goes like, I want to fly, because that's probably the most practical one to be like, especially I live in London. So public transport is great, but I live in Southeast London where public transport is terrible. So being able to fly would be really useful, but I think it's not that. In all honesty, I think telekinesis, because I'm fundamentally a lazy person. And if I can like grab a book from my shelf without standing up, like chef kiss. So I think probably telekinesis. Yeah.
I like the thing on Charmed where one of the sisters can just kind of like blink herself and she's in a new location. That seems super useful too. And you could use that like I could kind of teleport myself to get my Buffy book and then teleport myself back. I think that would be useful. And can you recommend any books for fans of your books?
I can, and I even came prepared with them on the
side. Does the homework. This is good.
No, so I've got a bunch of like queer YA stuff. Happy Head by Josh Silver, super lovely guy, very cool. Like kids in this institute where they're trying to like be happy, very weird and dystopian. And as a kid who also went to drama school, like Josh and I were talking like this. There's a lot of crossover in kids trying to do everything to please adults, and it's really good. All That's Left in the World by Eric J. Brown. Fantastic queer romance at the end of like a dystopia, essentially. Two kids traveling down the US after everyone's kind of like, I dropped it on the floor. After the world's ended, after like a super flu, and they kind of like fall in love and stuff. The Darkness Outside Us by Elliot Schroeffer. Oh my goodness, so good. This was like my favorite book of last year. It didn't come out last year. The sequel is coming out this year. But it's two astronauts from like warring countries wake up on this ship that they don't realize is docked, and it's just the two of them and the AI in the thing. It's so good. They begin to fall in love, but then it's, oh my goodness, good twists. And a great book that's not out yet, but I got a proof for, Now Conjurers by Freddie Kolsch. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, but it's so good. It's set in the 90s. It is a coven of witches in America, like teenage coven. and one of them like starts with one of them having been like horrifically murdered, and they are trying to figure out how it's a little bit it's a little bit Sabrina, the new Sabrina, the scary Sabrina, not the one with Salem the talking cat, my Sabrina, not that one, but fantastic. Really recommend that. And then for something completely different, Broken Hearts and Zombie Parts by Will Hussey, lovely guy, and queer romance. Those are my queer YA recommendations.
I need that witchy one. You said 90s and I was interested, and then you said witches and murder, and I was like,
no, I was like, I feel like Amy's gonna vibe with this one.
Yeah, and is the kissing too? Like,
the mild amount of kissing, I think.
Okay,
yes, there is kissing at some
point.
point.
With mild. Yeah.
There is blood, so you know, you're there.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. And I love the fact you came so prepared. That's usually where people get the look of horror. Like, I forgot about this question. So I don't remember what books are. In my first ever interview that I did, it was during COVID. My agent interviewed me and she asked what I was currently reading and I couldn't remember. And I was like, the horror of not being able to remember. And I was like, it's in the other room. It's right there. Why can I not remember what it is? So since then, I've been like, here's my pile of books. And I know exactly what they're about. And the author's names are here, so I can't mess up too much. It's just the horror.
Author's name as well before, but in case you're like, oh, no. Yeah.
Oh, well, thank you. That was super lovely, as I knew it would be, and lots of fun. I hope everybody is enjoying reading the book. I'm not sure when this interview will go up, so whether people have already read it by that point or not, but we haven't spoiled it, so well done us. Thank you so much for watching. Thank you, David, for being here, and hopefully I'll see you in the next author interview. Bye.